The house was quieter than I remembered. No radio humming from the kitchen. No creak of my father's boots across the floor. Only the slow, deliberate ticking of the wall clock. Loud enough to make the silence feel heavy. I paused in the doorway, waiting for someone, anyone, to acknowledge me. No one did. Charles Carter, my father, stood near the fireplace, staring at something I couldn't see. Margaret, my mother, sat stiffly on the edge of the sofa. Her hands knotted tight around the hem of her blouse. Neither looked up when I cleared my throat. Finally, my father moved. He walked over without urgency and pressed a sealed envelope into my hand. His voice, when it came, was soft, almost rehearsed. "Sometimes," he said, "the clean break is the only kindness left." I blinked, struggling to process his words. Before I could speak, he stepped back, his eyes never quite meeting mine. My suitcase was already packed, leaning against the doorframe like a silent verdict. When I picked it up, something hard shifted inside. I unzipped a side pocket and pulled out a small wooden bird, carved and sanded smooth by my grandfather's hands when I was 7. I turned it over in my palm, my chest tightening. They had packed it for me, or someone had. Someone who remembered. Movement caught my eye. Mrs. Dalton, our housekeeper for nearly 2 decades, was standing half-shrouded in the hallway shadows. Her hands gripped the fabric of her apron, her mouth a thin, trembling line. When our eyes met, she looked away sharply, as if the sight of me was more than she could bear. I turned back toward my parents. No words came. There were no goodbyes, no warnings, no second chances. Only the slow, final sound of the front door swinging shut behind me. I thought I'd hear anger. Instead, I heard silence. The kind that meant I no longer existed. Behind me, the house stood quiet, as if it had never known me at all. At first, I thought maybe they just needed time. For a few days, I checked my phone, half expecting a text from my mother, a call from my father, something from Ethan. But the silence grew thicker with each hour. And then the erasure began. My name disappeared from the Carter Family Farm website, where it had once proudly sat under Next Generation Leadership. Photos from family events started vanishing online, as if I'd been cropped out, not with scissors, but with careful, surgical precision. A week later, standing in line at the local grocery store, I overheard Mrs. Pennington whisper to another neighbor, "You know, they say Emily had troubles. It's such a shame." She shook her head with a cluck of pity, her voice low but slicing all the same. I didn't confront her. I just paid for my apples and left, the walls of the town closing in tighter around me. One night, my phone lit up. A message from Ethan, just 6 words, "It wasn't your fault. Stay safe." No name, no explanation, no way to reply. Then he was gone too, his number disconnected by the morning. The stories spread faster than I could keep up. Whispers of irresponsibility, instability. Wild accusations I didn't even recognize as my own life. It was a small town, stories stuck easily. One evening, an envelope slipped through my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a letter, handwritten in a shaky but familiar script. "If you ever need anything, you have more people on your side than you know. Mrs. Howell, my old art teacher." Someone remembered. Someone still believed in the version of me they hadn't rewritten. I sat at the kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hand. Somewhere between grief and anger, a realization began to harden. They hadn't just disowned me, they had replaced me. The first crack in their perfect story came by accident. I was at the bank on a rain-heavy Thursday afternoon, opening a small business account under my own name. No more ties to Carter or anything. Tommy Hart, a bank clerk who had tutored me in high school algebra, called my number. He smiled, that awkward, too quick smile people wear when they don't know whether to congratulate or pity you. As he pulled up my information, he hesitated. Then, too casually, he said, "Funny, isn't it, seeing your cousin Michael listed as the Carter Farm's sole trustee now?" I froze. "Trustee?" I repeated, careful to keep my voice neutral. Tommy paled. "Oh, sorry, I assumed you knew. It's public record now, since the restructuring." His words tumbled over themselves like loose stones. I smiled tightly, signed where he indicated, and walked out into the cold drizzle. The documents in my hand already forgotten. Michael, not my brother, not me, Michael. 2 days later, I caught sight of him in town, swaggering into the country club, his cufflinks catching the light. He was wearing a new Rolex, laughing louder than anyone around him. It wasn't just inheritance, it was power. Power he already believed was safely his. That night, digging through an old box of paperwork I had salvaged from the farmhouse years ago, I found something strange, a missing page. A gap where an addendum to the Carter family trust should have been. The very document my grandfather had once proudly shown me, where both Ethan and I had been named. Gone, replaced. It wasn't an oversight, it wasn't a misunderstanding. It had been a plan, and I had been the first casualty. The more I dug, the dirtier it became. It wasn't just about favoring Michael, it was about survival, their survival. Years ago, without public notice, the Carters had leased a large section of our land to developers. Not just any land, but part of a federally protected wetland. Disguised under false paperwork. It should have been a scandal big enough to wipe the Carter name off the map. Only it hadn't, because someone young, eager, and reckless, had found a way to bury it. Michael. He had connections through college friends, lawyers willing to look the other way, investors desperate enough not to ask questions. He had saved them, but there was a cost. The Carter name couldn't afford scrutiny. It needed clean hands, a clean legacy. And I had never been good at keeping secrets. When I was 16, I had stumbled across a map in my grandfather's study. Bright red lines slashed across parcels that were supposed to remain untouched. I had asked too many questions, I had made too many notes. And in their eyes, I had become a risk they couldn't control. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being their daughter. I became their liability. That's why it had been so silent. That's why they had erased me. Not in anger, but in cold, practiced necessity. I wasn't the problem they had to solve, I was the witness they needed to erase. And they thought they had succeeded. I left town without fanfare, taking the wooden bird and what little dignity I had left. The next few years blurred into long shifts and longer nights. Waiting tables, filing papers, studying by borrowed lamplight. Every scholarship felt like a lifeline. Every small victory felt stolen from a future they tried to bury me in. Sometimes I wondered if they ever thought of me. If Ethan still kept my birthday circled on his calendar. If my mother ever opened a drawer and found something of mine she forgot to throw away. But I didn't let the wondering stay long, there was too much work to do. I enrolled in an agricultural science program, drawn to the idea of growing something real, something honest. Sustainable farming was a risky, narrow road. but it felt like a kind of rebellion. A quiet, steady refusal to live by their rules. The first year nearly broke me. A drought swept through the county. And what little crop I managed to coax from the ground withered under the punishing sun. I stared at the cracked earth and the dead seedlings, and felt something hollow open up inside me. Not grief, exactly, but the brutal certainty that no one was coming to save me. A friend suggested I cut my losses. "Go home," she said gently, not knowing there was no home left to return to. Instead, I found a small loan, mortgaged every scrap of collateral I owned, and started again. I bought seeds tougher than the last, dug trenches deeper, studied soil composition late into the nights. Meanwhile, quietly, steadily, my work began to eat into the local markets, including contracts once dominated by the Carter name. I didn't plan it that way, but sometimes life has a sharper sense of justice than we do. They shut every door, so I learned how to build houses without them. The invitation came by accident, or maybe by arrogance. A glossy card slipped into my mailbox, addressed to Friends of the Carter Legacy. A gala fundraiser, held in the newly renovated town hall, designed to save the family farm from unforeseen financial hardship. I stared at the gold script, the list of sponsors, the desperate optimism bleeding through every word. For a long moment, I considered throwing it away. But something in me, not anger, not revenge, just a quiet, bone-deep curiosity, urged me to see for myself. The night of the gala, the town hall gleamed under strings of fairy lights. Guests in polished shoes and bright dresses milled about, sipping wine, trading stories, pretending not to notice the undercurrent of desperation clinging to the Carter family like smoke. I moved through the crowd, unnoticed. Just another shadow in a room full of polite illusions. On one wall, they had arranged a photo montage. Proud moments from generations past. I found myself staring at a picture I hadn't seen in years. Me, at 12 years old, clutching a blue ribbon for a science fair project on sustainable soil management. I remembered the day that photo was taken. I remembered my father's dismissive shrug, my mother's quick glance away, Michael's laugh behind my back. Now it hung here, like a trophy they had claimed without ever having wanted it. During the speeches, a former councilman raised his glass and asked, with thinly veiled sharpness, "Isn't it true the Carters faced some misunderstandings about their land use a few years back?" The smile on Charles Carter's face tightened. Margaret's fingers dug into the linen of the tablecloth. Michael's glass tipped slightly in his hand before he caught it. The cracks, once invisible, were beginning to show. Their smiles stretched wide for the cameras, but the foundations beneath them were crumbling. I circled the room carefully, staying to the edges where the light was soft, and the faces less familiar. It was a strange feeling, walking among people who once knew me, who had sat beside me at church picnics and school recitals, and now passed without a second glance. I was a ghost, haunting my own history, unseen and unacknowledged. Near the dessert table, I almost collided with Charles. For one breathless second, I thought he would recognize me, that some instinct stronger than sight would pull his gaze to mine. But the band struck up a louder tune, and he turned away, distracted by a handshake from the mayor. I exhaled slowly and moved toward the rear of the hall, where Ethan stood, speaking with a small cluster of investors. His suit hung looser on him than it once had, his hairline pulled back farther from his forehead, his smile tight and forced. I recognized the exhaustion in his eyes before he even spoke. When I approached the table, one of the investors, a sharp-eyed man with a worn leather portfolio, gave me a curious glance. "And who might you be?" he asked. Before I could reply, Ethan answered for me, voice strained but polite. "She's with Verdant Innovations," he said, one of the partners. The investor raised an eyebrow, interest flickering across his face. "Impressive," he said, offering his hand. "You folks are making big moves in sustainable markets. We were just discussing a potential contract with your team." Ethan avoided my gaze as he spoke, as if some part of him already knew who he was introducing, and couldn't bear to face it. I stood among them like a ghost. The memory they had buried, now breathing again. The auctioneer tapped the microphone, calling for attention. Charles took the stage with practiced ease, the Carter name heavy in his mouth, as he spoke about legacy, stewardship, and a future built on partnership with leaders in sustainable innovation. I listened, not out of anger, but with a strange, detached curiosity, as if I were hearing the final notes of a song I'd outgrown. When he mentioned Verdant Innovations, tying their farm's bold new chapter to the credibility of our growing brand, something in the room shifted. A few heads turned toward me, the quiet woman in the back, the one Ethan had just introduced. I waited until the polite applause died down. Then, with steady steps, I crossed the floor and raised my hand politely. The moderator, perhaps sensing a major donor among them, nodded in encouragement. "Yes, ma'am." My voice, when it came, was clear and calm. "I just wanted to clarify," I said. "Verdant Innovations has no formal contract with the Carter family at this time. In fact, due to pending compliance reviews related to prior land management practices, we are not currently accepting partnership proposals from their operations." Silence fell across the hall, sharp and immediate. I could see the words land like stones, see the confusion flicker into understanding across the faces of the investors. Charles's hand gripped the edge of the podium. For a flicker of a second, something broke through his polished facade. Not fury, but something worse, shame. He said nothing, neither did I. There was no need. The truth didn't need to shout. It only needed to stand still long enough to be seen. I didn't stay for the aftermath. I slipped away as the murmurs began to rise, as the polite smiles fractured and the polite distance grew. Outside, the night air was crisp and clean, the stars sharp against the velvet sky. I had almost reached my car when I heard footsteps. "Ethan," he called my name once, soft, uncertain, like he wasn't sure he had the right to say it. When I turned, he stood there under the street lamp, thinner than I remembered, hands shaking slightly. "I tried," he said, voice cracking. "I tried to stop them." I believed him, maybe. But some betrayals wrought from inaction, not just intent. I looked at him, at the boy who had once slipped candy into my pockets when no one was looking, and I felt nothing but a quiet, final sorrow. Trying, I said gently, was never going to be enough. He didn't follow as I turned and walked away. Before I left, I paused at the donation table inside the hall and slipped something under the glass box. My old library card, the one my grandfather had signed for me so long ago. Later that year, an anonymous donation rebuilt the children's wing of the town library, the only place that had ever truly made space for me. They erased me from their story, but they could never erase the one I would write for myself.